Welcome on back, everyone, to Tough Talks. I am joined tonight by Dr. Daniel Stanislowski. Now, you might know him from the Great Reset podcast on Grand Forks Best Source, which is based out of, I believe it's Grand Forks, North Dakota, correct? I think, yes.
Yes.
Okay. But for those who don't know, Dan holds a Ph.D. in molecular biology and biochemistry. And to use his words, he doesn't let his degree limit or pigeonhole him because the truths of our world are not so confined to be found exclusively in such specialized knowledge sets. And certainly, one's intellect ought not to be shackled by higher education. Indeed, if one allows one's mind to be so chained, the truth of our reality will float by completely unnoticed. Several years ago, Dan sensed for the first time that things were profoundly disordered in our world, and this realization ignited in him a thirst for knowledge that would explain the disorder and enable him to learn, understand, and explain the sources of the disorder. This journey toward understanding of this disorder is, in turn, revealing its cure. And he was talking a lot via his podcast, Open Secrets, about some very intense topics like political pulmonology, which is the study of political evil, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the impact of science on society, the next million years, foundations and their danger, a litany of different topics, the bulk of which they're very intense and they can be very scary, especially when you start to delve into what some of the workings behind the scenes of some of our secret societies, some of our political activist groups, and some of our political leaders actually mean for the world writ large. Daniel, thank you again so much for agreeing to do the show. Welcome.
Eric, thank you very much for having me. I apologize. It's been a few months since we've been able to do this, but I know both of our lives have changed quite a bit in these last few months. It's been hectic, but
yes.
I'm very, very happy to be back on here with you and discussing these things. And thank you also for taking an interest in this and then reaching out to me and wanting to do this and want to talk about this stuff. Because if more people did that, these problems we are going to be talking about would go away. So cheers to that. Cheers to you and your willingness to engage with this subject matter.
For sure. Well, like I said already at the top of this, some of these concepts they're the stuff of nightmares, unfortunately, when you start to peel back the layers of them. But to quote Negan, although it's a bitter pill, swallow it we must.
Absolutely. And it's bad. I'll go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You go right ahead.
Yeah, I was saying that's a nice way to put it is a nightmare. And I feel so bad for your average individual living out there in this world who is totally clueless and for the most part godless. They have no place to turn except for the stimuli that is intentionally put in their environments that they consume, searching for some happiness, but all they find is sadness and emptiness. And it's really for them that my heart goes out to them. I want to help these people so much, and you can't really give them a gospel and a catechism and expect them to come to God, because they've been so hyper conditioned against that. And this really Open Secrets itself was a way to hopefully begin to peel back that conditioning, and expose them to truth that will help them. So,
and you've done a fantastic job of that. I've been through, I think, every single one of the episodes inside your podcast at least 2 or 3 times now, and I find myself going back to them again and again, because in my own research of various topics that I like to cover, and I guess the authors that have written a number of books that you've ended up covering, I find the way you've presented it is very, very easy to grab hold of and swallow. Obviously, there's some higher minded concepts that you do take the time to really go into, and it sometimes takes a second listen to really grab hold of. You've had the benefit of reading through all these books here, but it's nice how you are able to present it to the audiences when they do tune in to listen to you. And actually, let me pull up.
Go ahead.
I just want to pull up real quick. This is if you guys are looking to try and find Daniel's podcast here. It is called Open Secrets. You can find it on YouTube. Just punch in Open Secrets. You're looking for a playlist here. You can find it. It'll be on Grand Forks Best Source. There's going to be 15 videos inside there right now. They cover a ton of topics, and it is well worth the watch and the listen. I'm going to put the link inside of our comment section here so you guys can check that out at your leisure. There we go. All right. Please go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you very much for linking that. Ideas. I hope that there is. I hope people do find some use for that. It's a. I'm so against just sitting around and talking about the subjects too, though. It's like it was never
Mhm.
my intention to just be a guy who says look at the problem and doesn't ever try and stop the problem. And I feel that so many people are just used to we're trained to live such passive lives and to just sit in front of screens and consume and consume and consume that when you do that for years on end, it kind of stultifies you. You just sit there and you don't want to ever go out and do anything about it. And I know for a fact guys like Tucker Carlson, et cetera. I think I talked about this in our last podcast we did together, but they their goal is to talk about the problems, expose some little modicums of truth that people gobble up, and they think Tucker Carlson's talking about this, so it's going to be solved. Someone's going to do something about that, but that's
Mhm.
absolutely not the case. It's absolutely not the case, and I hope you know we inspire action as well.
That's
And,
the
and
aim of
it's
our
we need action.
conversations. No, that's the aim of this
Yeah.
conversation tonight, and the aim of our last one is to provide people with actual tools that they can use inside their lives, and not just talk about the problem, because it is all too easy to just talk about a problem without providing a solution.
Yes.
Actually, that said, we're going to jump into the topic of tonight, folks. We are getting into um, thinking beyond critical thinking, getting into the mindset that you need to pay attention to all those misnomers the world over that mean more than you could ever imagine, how to pick them out, and how to apply what you're learning through either a direct means where you're going and seeking out certain topics, or just through observation to your life, and hopefully enrich your life and the lives of those around you.
Mhm.
We're touching on a topic tonight which is referred to as The Ghost in the Machine. It was a book written by Arthur Koestler in 1967. We're also going to get into another book as well tonight, which was written by Bertrand Russell, and that is The Impact of Science on Society.
Mhm.
But there's, to sort of kick things off, there's a topic that is referred to inside The Ghost in the Machine as well. He talks about the four pillars of unwisdom,
Mhm.
and then he gets into a topic called the hold on principle. Can you go into what
Yes.
that is, Daniel?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, here's the book cover so
Oh,
people
awesome.
can see it. The Ghost in the Machine. I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. It's actually my favorite, non-religious nonfiction book of all time, by far. I was reading. I first read this book when I was actually writing my dissertation to finish my PhD,
Oh, wow.
and I wish I would have read it so much sooner. It just because and it's because of the principle of hold on. And into we'll get into that, but it actually really wished that this was taught to me. Like the first day of graduate school, like you get in there. So I was in the molecular biology and biochemistry program. I go there, and it's just like the very first day is like, just they just go over the syllabus, and it's just like back into all the stuff you've had 6 classes on already, and it felt kind of. Granted, I went to a rather mediocre institution, but it's like there should be more than this. It's like there should be more like to teach you how to think, to really to express what's inside of you, be able to help you make discovery and make intellectual and scientific advancements. And here I was at the end of my PhD career reading a book that helped me with that. And that is why I really enjoy The Ghost in the Machine. We're going to get into the nastiness contained therein as well. So, because Arthur Koestler himself, he worked for the KGB from 1930 to 1938,
Wow.
and he was one of these guys that worked for the KGB. And then what do you know? Later on in his career, he worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, and he worked for the CIA for in culture creation in Western Europe after World War II. So ex KGB, supposedly, who knows? I don't know. How connected the KGB, CIA, all that stuff was, and it's a virtual guarantee that the intelligence agencies are all working for
Hmm.
the the men at the top, so to speak. But Kessler is one of these guys, and absolutely brilliant. Of his books he's written, this is my favorite. He's written the 13th Tribe, which is an excellent book as well. Um, Darkness at Noon is another good one. Active creation's a one, but the ghost in the machine for me is really what did it. And so this hold on is essentially the way I view it is a philosophical principle. It's a mechanism of a way to think about the world and the subject matter you are intellectually engaging with. And so a holon, it comes from the Greek word holos, which means whole, with the suffix on, like neutron or proton, which means a part or particle. So a holon is something that is in and of itself a complete individual whole, yet is composed of smaller parts, the holon. Okay. And so in our world, virtually everything is a self-contained holon. And the example that he uses, and I think it's by far the best example when teaching what a holon is the human being. Because the human being, when you look inside the world that is contained within our skin, we are composed of all these systems, the circulatory system, the respiratory system, etc., digestive system, etc., etc., etc. Now, all of these systems are composed of organs. Organs are composed of cells. Cells are composed of fats, proteins, some carbohydrates. And you can get down even smaller into the carbon molecule constituents, which are themselves composed of neutrons, protons, electrons, which themselves are composed of quarks, Higgs bosons, blah blah blah. Right. So you can see this hierarchical structure to that which makes the human, how we're composed of trillions and trillions and trillions of smaller parts, which form this hierarchical structure that makes the physical essence of what a human is. But humans themselves are also a part of things. We are part of a family. We're part of churches. We're part of cities. We're part of states. We're part of organizations, parties, you name it, right? So a human being is a self-contained holon, right? And so now this, hopefully I'm making myself clear. It's
No, well, it's pretty easy to follow in the sense that as individuals, we are a holon. We're our own self-contained unit, but then we are also part of something else. So in effect, like every single thing in existence is both its own entity, but then part of something larger.
Yes, exactly. And you can see, I don't know if some of our listeners out there are into any sciences and whatnot. If you are in a science, start thinking about what you're working on in your science in this hierarchical organization. Because for me, right away you can see there's all these little tiny molecules floating around in your body, which touch proteins on cells, which change cells, right? So like there's this clear hierarchical setup within molecular biology and biochemistry, and thinking that way, it just helps you already come to the limitations of what I can do is purely in my lab then if I'm applying this principle, and I'm not just kind of stuck in a rut. It gives you this ability to think at a higher level. And so with holons, so all subject matter essentially is also a holon, like electricity. The example he uses a few examples in the book, but there's the subject matter of electricity. And then before we knew a lot about what electricity was, there was still what people knew about electricity. And there's this matrix of what makes up electricity. But then there was also this matrix of what makes up magnetism. And before someone made the connection that electricity and magnetism work together, electromagnetism is how magnetism works, it was just undiscovered until someone in their mind put these two possibilities together. This matrix that makes up what is electricity and this matrix that makes up what is magnetism, the combination thereof inside the intellect is the act of discovery. And he actually calls that process the bisociation of holons. And so he recommends that you in your head, because it actually doesn't harm anything to smash together ideas in your head, and in so doing, it lends itself to discovery and advancement, and especially in the scientific engineering world, right? But here we have, come into the problem of what Arthur Koestler is writing about here is this holon, as he's analyzing mankind. He uses this tool, the tool of the holon, to really assess the issues of humanity, because humans obviously are not simply animals that have
Mhm.
zero soul whatsoever, and no ability to think and reason and ruminate and have emotions, etc., etc., etc. Humans are actually far more complex than that, and he was very much against the behaviorism, the atheistic, soulless behaviorism that was dominating the psychological landscape at that time. And I think, in my personal opinion, he goes way too far against behaviorism, because I think if you could fast forward and see what's happening in 2020, behave a lot of domination of behaviorism was happening to mankind.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but what he says is there's this ghost in the machine that is in a human. Humans have this wonderful biological machinery that operates their body, which is, to us, obviously a reflection of the wonder of our creator. Um, but to him, what happens is he sees this process that humans engage their consciousnesses in, or lack of engagement, according to him, but that led to disaster after disaster after disaster, and war after war after war. And he describes that as a problem of what's called integration. Now, when a whole on, again, let's just think humans, when a human being is acting as a human being and asserting himself, the individual asserts himself, he calls that the self-assertive principle. When he's acting as an individual, when he's acting as a composite, when he's giving himself to an ideology, for example,
Mhm.
he is acting in integration, right? And the way and what he describes his problem is humans are integrating. They identify with some ideologue who's very charismatic, and this ideologue is getting them to integrate into some ideology that is actually ruinous. And it's he makes a brilliant argument, to be perfectly honest with you, because he says, like, especially in terms of religion, and that across the ancient world, in disparate civilizations across the globe that could have no contact with each other whatsoever, you found this phenomenon, for example, of child sacrifice to
Sure.
the gods, if you will. How they would throw the babies in the burning idol, or whatever it is. And he uses that as kind of the look. Humans have this power of consciousness within them, this ghost in the machine, but they have a distinct inability to apply it properly, and that's a problem that is going to result in the extinction of all human life. And so
Hmm.
this is the problem that he tackles in this book, and he does it again. I think he makes a very good argument, except he's wrong ultimately, because God exists and we must know who He is, love Him, and serve Him.
Yes.
Um, but there is a problem when people worship Satan, for example, or they worship Molech and toss their babies in the burning you know bull statue, if you will.
Yep.
Um, and so the and this is I'm going to try to word this um, without saying the naughty words that get
Sure.
banned, because
Well, jab or squirt and plague.
yeah, exactly. Because this people, I don't know if people know, did this used to be on the playlist for Open Secrets, this book, but um, at the very end of it, when I talk about Arthur Kessler's conclusion to this, The Ghost in the Machine, the video got pulled off of YouTube, so I'll do my best to avoid the naughty words. But
Sure.
he talks about how they need to muster new of biochemistry, and he even cites a meeting in like 1960 or 61, where they were talking about controlling the mind. It was literally a symposium, which you and I weren't invited to, obviously, on
Yeah.
how
Right.
to end up controlling human consciousness. And he cited a professor, I forget the man's name, who was using mRNA products, again, 1961, mRNA products, injectables, to that he would pump into people that would alter their brain and thinking patterns, such that this problem of you know uh, people actually thinking in a free way that they didn't like, solve this. This would be one way to solve that issue.
Sure,
So
it
this
almost gets rid of the
book, which is
non-compliance issue.
was a very powerful. Um,
Well, it gets rid of
yeah,
the
yeah, absolutely.
non-compliance issue for people.
It would 100%. Yeah, yep. And it just took them 20 or 60 years, whatever it was, to find a way to get people to inject that stuff into them. It took a lot more technique, if you will, and understanding of behaviorism to actually achieve that end. But Kessler was proposing that, as a solution for the problem of human consciousness, in the late 60s, 67, I think this book was published, right? And so
That's
you see there
so
too.
wild. So there's a couple of things that I want to touch on real quick because I feel like it'll lend itself in. He talks about the 4 pillars of unwisdom very early on into the book, and mentions that these are things that he believes you need to avoid, especially when you're engaged in the scientific method. I just want to read these here because they're so it's wild to think that. I mean, okay, it's not wild to think that yes, clearly you'd want to avoid doing these 4 things here. But it's amazing when you look at our current day and age to see how readily these are embraced and are swallowed down just as easily as pie. The first one is part A, biological evolutions is the result of random mutations preserved by natural selection, which he dispenses with. Part B, mental evolution is the result of random tries preserved by reinforcements. Part C, all organisms, including man, are essentially passive automata controlled by the environment whose sole purpose in life is the reduction of tensions between adaptive responses. And then part D, the only scientific method worth that name is quantitative measurement. And consequently, that complex phenomena must be reduced to simple elements accessible to such treatment without undue worry whether the specific characteristics of complex phenomena, for instance, man may be lost in the process.
Yeah.
And that's really the problem with reductionism. You break those things down to such tiny parts that suddenly what you're studying is sort of meaningless. It's like you mentioned in the podcast, it was like taking a brick and observing a brick and waiting for the brick to tell you how a cathedral was built.
Right. Yes, exactly. And that it is a reductionism in and of itself. So reductionism is breaking things down to their smallest parts and then understanding these small parts to figure out how the whole works. Right. But within our scientific insanity now, it's the problem is reductionism, because you can't solve complex problems, with solutions at this highly reductionist level. It's actually impossible. And like this, for example, the stuff I was studying ADHD and addiction. And I was studying a protein called the dopamine transporter. The dopamine transporter is the target for things like cocaine and amphetamines, methamphetamines, that type of thing. But I was looking at just how this protein gets modified by a fat molecule, like how when fat molecules stick to it, how does it change the function of the protein? Well, let me tell you right now, that's not going to solve addiction. That's not going to solve ADHD. It's got 0% chance to do that, right? And there's labs like this thing I was working on those problems across the globe en masse. I mean, hundreds of thousands of these things everywhere. It's like when like Tony Fauci can come out and talk about how HIV causes AIDS, right? And it's totally biases, destroys the scientific pool, if you will. Then everyone, 100,000 researchers all working on HIV, AIDS as if it's caused by HIV in their own little tiny reductionist paradigms, because when you work in these tiny little reductionist paradigms, you can't see the forest for the trees. It's actually impossible. And I'm actually working on writing up a paper on prolonged water fasting. And so that'd be like black fast, like water only fasts for extended periods of time. And it's because it's a powerful tool where you can actually shut off, basically flip the reset switch on your metabolic system en masse, and it actually regenerates your immune system such that people have cured themselves of autoimmunities by doing this. And it costs $0 to do it, right? You sprinkle some salt in your water once every day or whatever, right? You just go without food for as long as you can stand it. I mean, it's a lot more detailed than that. Just, research your people. I'm not saying just go research it first.
You're right. It starts today.
Yeah. But it's because it's like the all autoimmunities have like it's so fascinating because when I get into this research like this, you just see like because I think like on the by the principle of HOLA now, I can now see these problems in a much clearer light. But the solutions that the pharmaceutical companies offer you, by and large, are at what I referred to earlier, that molecular level, that small, like very small level. And while that molecular approach definitely can benefit you symptom wise, notice that you'll never stop taking these the rest of your life because it
Mm.
will not cure. It's actually impossible to cure something. And I've found that in autoimmunities, all of this is something that's actually been discovered in all autoimmune disorders, by the way, is that you have your immune system has two branches to it. It has the innate branch, which is like the macrophages. It's always on. It's scouring your body, trying to find bacteria, whatever toxins that are in your body to destroy them and expel them. But then there's this innate, or excuse me, the adaptive arm of your immunity, which is the memory arm. It's how you gain immunity for the rest of your life. If you have a tough, cold or whatever, then you all of a sudden you're immune to that pathogen for the rest of your life. Well, what happens is there's also parts of that memory immune system that tamp down the innate immune system. And when your innate immune system is recognizing your own body and trying to destroy it, you need this other thing to say, "Hey, stop doing that." Well, they found in all these autoimmunities that the stem cells that produce all the cells for your immune system, like it's called the hematopoietic stem cells. And the very first differentiation point it makes is it either becomes cell types for the innate cell, that macrophage scavenging system, or it becomes the lymphoid multipotent progenitor system, which is a memory system, right? It also has the Treg cells, which shut off this thing. And this branch of it is there's a defect in your stem cells that this really doesn't happen anymore. So you just have a rampant innate immune response constantly. So it's also called the inflammatory response because if you have like rheumatoid arthritis, for example, all these immune cells keep flying into your joints because they're recognizing some part of your body as an invader, even though it's not. And so this just nonstop invasion of these things into your joints, which causes massive pain, right?
Wow. It's like your
And
body's actively attacking itself at that point.
yeah, and so in order to reset this stem cell process, you need to fast. You need to fast. You need to alter the metabolism of these cells. So you need to alter your own metabolism in order to do that, and you do that by getting into catabolism, which is a breakdown system, autophagy, and you do that by not eating food, not taking calories for as an extended time. And people who went 14, 15, 16, 20, 25, 30 days, and they've completely ridded themselves of autoimmunities doing this, and
Wow.
it's like, but this understanding of these complex processes, if the way you're trained classically in graduate school for the biological sciences is you're just given a molecule that you look at, and that's all you study, and then hopefully you can make a career in that molecule, and the
Jeez. And
problem is,
then the learning it only becomes simple associations like, oh well, a molecule is comprised of atoms, and then those atoms are comprised of protons and electrons, and like you're only staying within such a macro. But like you were
yeah,
saying before, in order to bioassociate something, it's like you have to imagine, like the first person whoever suggested that the earth might be round, um and everybody laughed in their face, and then finally we're able to with the telescope observe the curvature of the earth, and suddenly it's like, oh shoot, wow.
yeah,
Where the two concepts that had to finally meet there in the middle took somebody thinking, well, okay, I see this here, and by simple association I could just say, well, if I just look over my horizon, yeah, it looks straight to me, I guess I
mhm,
conclude that the earth is flat. Well, then somebody says, but what if I look up to the stars here? Well, will this tell me anything here? And then you have those two separate ideas that suddenly collide together to present a new truth, which now is a pillar of our everyday
right.
life.
Right, and I think the other example that he uses here, this biassociation of holons, is how tides work. Because before we knew that it was the moon doing it, you had all the knowledge of what constituted a tide back in 16 whatever it was, and then you had all the knowledge of what constituted the moon and how the moon moves, et cetera, et cetera. But someone was like, they noticed like, oh, jeepers, maybe the moon is moving like this, and whenever it's here, the tide's out, and then whenever it moves here, the tide comes in. They said in their mind, again, they're bisociating all the knowledge of the moon, all the knowledge of the tides, putting them together, and voila, now we know that how the moon moves actually affects the tides of the ocean. So it's a highly, highly beneficial way to think, and that's actually how I organize open secrets, actually in my mind, because all of these nasty, principles we talk about, the control of behaviorism, the culture creation, the psychopathy, all of these things are part of the structure of dominance that we are all subjected to. And so in the whole on of human dominance, the you find all those things. You find the culture creation, the behavior control, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And so it's a way. That's why I'm actually quite grateful that I started to get into these books, even though it's like not personally very beneficial reading. I guess it does like some enlightenment, but I'd rather be doing spiritual reading and that type of thing.
Sure.
But I feel like this is definitely a calling, to read, understand this, and perhaps better articulate the problems that we're subjected to hopefully help people.
Sure. Well, and you sort of covered there without actually saying the three terms you mentioned inside the book, where it talks about that biassociation way of thinking. And you have when you're coming to new ideas, you have the aha, the haha, and then the I guess
Right. Yes.
endpoints when
Yep.
you arrive to these ideas. And the way you described it was we had the aha, we've learned something, and this is scientific discovery. It's a fusion of two previously, I guess, hitherto ununited concepts or ideas, and then we solve this complex problem. So we have the aha, then we have the haha, where we view something as comedic in its absurdity, and we have the collision, like you mentioned, with the tides. Everybody laughed at whoever suggested that, and then suddenly,
Right.
oh, okay, well, it made us then go out and exact an experiment to see if that was actually true, and then the that transcendent juxtaposition. Could you touch just a little bit on what you've noticed throughout your own study? Because you did mention also throughout the course of the Ghost in the Machine, you mentioned the Skinner box, and you mentioned how they worked with rats, and they found that you could set up a little button for a rat to press, a little lever, and it might drop a food pellet as a reward. And that rat would work however hard to get his food pellet because he knew the reward was coming. But then when they didn't give that reward as often, if there was a number of times he had to press it before he could finally get the next one, they found that he would work harder. But I know you mentioned also that you did some study on rats as well.
Yeah. Well, the stuff I was doing on rats, it was like I was cutting their heads off and dissecting their brains and just because so that's where the protein and stuff I was looking at, the dopamine. Obviously, the dopaminergic system is in your brain, right? And so we can't, obviously, we'll never do that to humans. So we have to study it in the rat model system. That too, that's actually interesting because the dopamine system, that pleasure system, is what Koestler refers to as the old brain, the lizard brain, which is called this limbic system. And it's studying that. We find that people obviously are highly influenced by this limbic system, the desire to seek pleasure, the desire to seek drugs, sex, television, video games, blah, blah, blah. And you go on down the line, all of these things activate that part of your brain. And for Koestler, this is a problem because when it comes in conflict with the new brain, quote unquote, the neocortex, the limbic system, this old brain, wins out every single time, almost every single time in most people, especially now, certainly now. And so they needed to find more complex ways to keep people from not thinking, right, from not understanding the realities that we are in, and so this is where kind of Bertrand Russell actually kind of enters the picture too, because as you kind of mentioned, it's actually, it was before the show when we were talking how it's interesting how Bertrand Russell and Arthur Koestler kind of have these um, they share the same thoughts a lot. It's almost like they kind of work together, and
Mhm.
it is. It's right. It is. I mean, Bertrand Russell was he worked for like the Fabian Society. He was part of the Macy group, and that's he was part of all kinds of behind the scenes think tanks, and understanding what you know Kessler is talking about in terms of dominating human consciousness. Bertrand Russell was already actually like way ahead of Kessler, right? I mean, the impact of science on society. He talks about how basically they're going to create a scientific dictatorship,
Hmm.
and that scientific dictatorship will be a benevolent one. I mean, if you read these books, they always try to bring you onto their side, right? They're always trying to sell it to you as if they're benevolent people who they only want what's best for you and I, but that's just actually like totally opposite of what's true. Because Bertrand Russell, The Impact of Science on Society, that book is 1952, and it's actually way ahead of its time, and
Oh
that is the
yeah.
problem. Like of the it's also it's way ahead of its time, not because Bertrand Russell was necessarily a genius or Arthur Koestler was necessarily a genius. I believe they're very intelligent men, certainly, but they were working behind the scenes in these think tanks, these organizations that they pay people very handsomely. They pay the best and the brightest to come together and decide how to put humanity under their control, right? And so you know, while Arthur Kessler's kind of solution is just let's inject something into them, Bertrand Russell's is well let's do that. I mean, let's inject them with nasty stuff, but let's also feed them just nasty stuff. And he gets into in the impact of science on society. He talks about how the education system is going to get to a point where we're going to convince the people we're educating that the color of snow is black, and we need to refine our education such that we need to understand exactly how much money it's going to be to get them to think it's black versus dark gray. To find out that monetary difference in case we need to make these fine modifications to it. And so Bertrand Russell is literally, let's dominate the environment that any human being is raised in. Let's control all stimuli within that environment so that this individual is actually totally cybernetically controlled from birth to death, that they have no hope of ever escaping our clutches and ever having a free thought in their head, an individual thought. And
Wow.
I argue very strongly that while we're not there completely, certainly, if we were there, obviously you and I wouldn't be having this conversation. But we're close. I mean, we're getting closer as the days go by here, and from my analysis, there's nothing stopping this at all. So, and so
Wow.
like for example, I mean, Bertrand Russell talks about using mass psychology, right? 1952, already talking about how propaganda in a marching band with loud trumpets and banging drums and stuff can do far more for you than the longest train of syllogisms most eloquently said. Because people don't want reason, they don't like reason, so let's get them the sports. He even talks in here again, 1952, about how the media, news, and sports folks are already controlled by large corporations. And so again, this stimuli in the environment, we want we put NFL on their television so that they consume that instead of consuming any good knowledge, anything of value that can actually help them to flourish as a human and stop the control system, right?
That's the crux of it right there. Is within that same book, The Impact of Science, there was a section inside there where you were talking about what's the idea of, or what's required to essentially rope all the masses into a certain kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, it really a lot of what you were sharing really came off to me like, if you have to do one of two ways. You either have to make them so comfy and so full of pleasure that they're content with whatever is going on around them, as long as they've
Yeah.
got their video games, they've got their sports ball, they've got their Doritos, they've got their Netflix and chill. You can do whatever you want so long as you just don't mess with the leisure time. Or
Yeah.
you have to make them so miserable
Mm-hmm.
that anything that seems to be a step above that misery, they'll say, yep, fine, go ahead, just do it, just go
Mm-hmm.
ahead, get us out of this existential quagmire that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and
That's
it's wild that, well, sorry, one last little thing here. You mentioned also inside your podcast the idea that, you know, we'll park a child in front of a television at such a very, very early age. And a lot of people, unfortunately, they like to babysit with the TV. Like my son, he does get some TV time, but typically we try and put on something educational for him, which has to do with water, or it has to do with the seasons, or it has to do with constructing something. But a lot of people will just let their kids be babysit by a television there.
right.
And they're programming into this little guy that there needs to be somewhat of a constant pursuit of pleasure.
Yes.
No time for you to just be able to sit and think of your own accord. You have to constantly be having some sort of information launched through your eye gates into your brain.
Yes. And that's actually like a very high level of stimulation as well. Even just staring into a screen, it sets your threshold for attention at a very high bar. And so, like the way, it's the way that addiction works too. I guess I'll get into this because it's a fascinating subject. I love this stuff actually. You know, the way that whenever you do something for the first time, whenever you have perform any behavior, and the classic example is just it's what you use is drug taking. Okay, like before you do the drug taking, you have your expectation of what this experience is going to be like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you consume the drug, you consume the reward, right? And then you have what's called a reward prediction error. So it's how far off was your expectation of the event from the actual pleasurable sensations you received during the event itself. Now, if your expectation was much lower than the actual pleasure you experienced, you had a positive prediction error. Therefore, the second time you go to do that same reward or same behavior, excuse me, you expect that same level of reward, right? But with video games, etc., these types of things, it's the same process. It's the same exact thing. Oh, by the way, this is all coordinated by dopamine within the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure center of your brain, right? And so from subsequent times performing that same behavior, you expect that same outcome. Well, as you know, there's diminishing returns on these things, and so you need to do more and more and more of the drug or X behavior, to get the same level of stimulus. But you can tell when people watch tons of television or play lots and lots of video games because their ability to sit and focus on normal conversation is so low because they're used to inundating their neurons with this massive level of stimulation constantly, and it becomes a robotic process. Their brain, it's I mean, they use their soul to direct their body to do these things, but at some point it's like their brain, that physical animal that they are, is now begging them, please go back and play video games, please go back and do this, and it becomes all they can think about it. And then their imagination seeds their mind, and then they can't focus anymore. They're like, oh, this, sitting in class and looking at professor talk about this on the chalkboard is actually super boring, because it is by and large, right? And so they're like, all they can think about then is, I want my next fix, I want my next thing, and it's totally, doing that to a 6-month-old. I'm sure we've seen the walking through a restaurant, you see the family that have this couple, and they're both staring into their iPads, and then like the kids on the other side of the table are also staring at the iPads, and there's no communication going between parents and children. That's horrible. You're like those children's brains like cannot develop normally after that. The level of stimulation they need to care just about what's happening anywhere outside of their screen is it requires a far higher bar of stimulation now, right? And so, thank goodness the brain is a very plastic thing. It means that it changes very quickly and readily to the stimuli that surround it. So if you do what's called a dopamine fast, I guess we should call this episode the fasting episode or something.
Yeah,
but
right.
a dopamine fast is like you just avoid all high level stimulation things. So like no caffeine, no screens, no like human people. Some people that do it, they like no interaction with anyone else whatsoever, and they just sit inside a room with just like a pad and a pencil, and that's it. That's all they do for as long as they can take it, and potentially
Wow.
up to days. And but the reason is because once your brain becomes used to a far lower level of stimulation, all of a sudden you kind of normalize your expectation of reward from every waking moment of your life. Um, but yeah, it's a really nasty problem that we have to overcome because everything is moving towards the digital, right? All of our consciousness is so much of our consciousness, I should say, is being sucked into these digital realities, and you can never really trust, especially because these news medias, et cetera, are dominated by people who understand Bertrand Russell, who are of the ilk of Bertrand Russell and those guys. Like you can't uh, avoiding the digital paradigm actually is a very healthy thing to do, and
Oh
especially too.
man,
Yeah.
that's something right there. What you just said there. The people that do craft these things, like I don't know if you're familiar with the show The Black Mirror, but that's what our phones are. That's what our screens are. They're black mirrors, and people lock their brains away inside these for hours and hours and hours a day. Um,
Yeah.
Actually, I'm glad that they have a screen time app now on the phones where it shows, hey, look, you were down from last week where you might have had 3 hours of screen time. You're down to like an hour and a half now. It's nice to get that benchmark. I
Yeah.
mean, for some people, they don't give a rat's ass
Hmm.
what it says, but
Hmm.
it is interesting that the people that are behind these, they know this literature. They're in the pocket of Kessler. They're in the pocket of Bertrand Russell there. And what's
Oh,
even
absolutely.
wilder too, when you look at the secret societies and you look at the idea of we'll talk about spiritual warfare for a second. The idea of praying in concert with God to either bring about something or keep something from happening. And it's directly you partner with your creator, and people look at that and they disparage it because they don't understand it. People from an outside perspective, they're like, oh, you're praying to the great sky daddy. Yeah, have fun praying within your own mind, you jackwagon. Wow, that's
Hmm.
weird. I did not expect fireworks to go off behind me there. That's strange.
Yeah.
um but the crazy thing is, you look at these secret societies and you look at these people that go to these humongous celebrity filled events where they have spirit cooking and they have weird arcane rituals going on. And even though we get disparaged for prayer, these people believe it to their core. They believe
Hmm.
in the witchcraft that they're working on. They believe in
Hmm.
the covens that they're a part of. They believe in these ancient ritualistic things to either conjure demonic presence, demonic powers, or to bring about some sort of nefarious end. They
Hmm.
believe it tooth and nail, but of
Yeah.
course, if you can disparage somebody else, then it throws the eye off of you.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's really disappointing to see how many people won't get into a healthy daily prayer life because they have been so disparaged. But yet
Hmm.
the dark side knows and believes 100% that they have to stay on top of their spiritual game if they want to have any possibility of having a foothold in this life.
Absolutely, 100%. Couldn't agree more. And yeah, you're right. They've used the culture, especially the television programming, that type of thing, to disparage prayer life, anything wholesome, good. They make it seem foolish and outdated. And you're absolutely 100% right about that. And it is important too. And that's another. Thank you for bringing this up because it's another aspect of the potency of the news media and television media and stuff like that is that when you watch a movie, when you watch news, you're put through a rigor of emotions that like a normal human existence wouldn't experience in like 20 years. And it's all just condensed in 2 hours that you're putting yourself through this stuff. Or heaven forbid you watch news and like you watch like Donald Trump and you're just like, oh man, it's Donald Trump guy. These are all techniques to make your heart attached to these aspects, these things that they want them to be attached to. And it really, like, especially in prayer, you need to use your intellect to seed the what you're meditating on about God, and then you use your understanding to try and understand and remember what you know about these things, so that you can hopefully God gives you more. He pours more of Himself into you through prayer. But then the next aspect of it is you try and give your heart actively, your will, to God. And when you're so used to just being pleasure, 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 and high emotion all the time, you gain your heart is attached to those things far more than it's attached to God. and undoing that stuff. I can't tell you. I've been trying to work through this because like I was raised totally in the system, like totally 100%, basically a godless life. You know, the whole watch a high school, R-rated movie. That was me. It's like
Hmm.
that's what I was told was good, from all the culture I was consuming, and so that's what I was out there doing. And even though it's quite a few decades now from that, it's so hard to get over those attachments. It takes a lot of work, and I wish I was never exposed to them. I wish I wasn't.
Hmm.
Because it's an impediment when I still feel these attachments. It's an impediment to my relationship with God, right? Which is terrible. And I wish that's another reason I'm just like, this culture needs to go away. I mean, it's like
Hmm.
it deserves to go away. It deserves to be wiped out. People are talking about America, like America's a great country, America's this, but why? Honestly, think about it. Like, why? What's the what? Everything that is the American system, everything. I mean, here we are, this last episode and this episode too, up until now, we're talking about the stuff, and it's all data about materialism. The material world we're describing is terrible. Material world is basically the worst it's ever been. Well, guess what the spiritual world looks like? Way worse, way worse. And everything in our system, virtually everything in our system, is highly correlated with, if not directly causative of, eternal damnation. And we got to stop that. That type of system doesn't get to keep going. Someone
Hmm.
must stop it. Someone must. But no one. All these people. It's like, let's just vote for this guy. Let's vote for that guy. Let's vote for this. We're not going to vote ourselves out of this problem. I mean,
Hmm.
such a very very issue. We need people who are ready to go to battle, ready to die for this. Because I mean, I as soon as we have an army somewhere, I'll join. Yeah,
Oh, dude,
army
same.
that'll take back, win for truth. Win for God.
Absolutely. Well, and that's
Yeah.
like part of
Speaking of
what we're doing
legislation.
here is we can present some solutions, and we can present some things that people can do readily. Um, Number one, the biggest thing is you have to be choosy, very, very choosy with how you actually spend your leisure time. I believe it was Benjamin Franklin who said, like, this is your ideal day. Think in the morning, act in the daytime, read in the evening, and sleep at night.
Mhm.
If you want to have a wholly rounded life and you want to be mentally fit and mentally sound, as well as physically fit and sound. Um, and not to
Yeah.
say that enjoying a movie or a video game or a show is inherently bad, but
Right.
be choosy with how you decide to enjoy that. Because, like you've
Yeah.
mentioned before in your show, that a lot of the entertainment out there is designed to keep us locked into a sixth grade level of understanding.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
it's rare that you watch a movie nowadays where you don't already know how everything is going to end within the first 30 minutes of watching it. It's rare.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
then you happen on a Stanley Kubrick film, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is high-minded stuff that I don't
Mhm.
hear talked about around the water cooler. And yet
Yeah.
those are the conversations that we should be having with people. We should be being able to talk about those deeper levels of meaning, whether it be familial or it be having to relate to your work or your spiritual life.
Mhm.
And so much of it is kept only to that surface. The sports ball, um,
Oh yeah.
what are your favorite restaurants? Did you see that crazy thing that some celebrity did the other day
Yeah.
on whatever game show that they appeared on?
Yeah.
It's
Oh, I
you
know.
have to be so choosy.
And I was like, I don't know, it was about a year ago or something. I was just having lunch by myself at a restaurant, and these two guys, like I don't know, in mid 40s, I want to say, like sat down at the table next to me, and I was just listening to the conversation. It was all NFL this and this sports guy this, and it's like, here's these guys like that should be in like the prime of their lives, and this is what they talk about. This is what their consciousnesses, their intellects are consuming and spitting out. It is very much a robotic, cybernetic existence that the Bertrand Russells of the world want these people living out. That's it. And if there's anything that people can unite behind, I think now this day in 2024 now, it's that these elites have had a very long game plan. They told us about it. They wrote about it. They have this weird consent thing where they have to tell the public they're going to do something before they do it to us. So they publish
It's
these
so
books that
weird.
they know no one's going to read, and they say, yeah, and they say, oh well, we put it out there. We told you it's going to happen. You didn't do it, so that means you're assenting to what we're doing to you. And then it's just been this slow boil the frog. Everyone's heard that, I know. Boil the frog scenario for several generations now, it's coming to a head. It's coming to the next thing that's coming. I get into this kind of in the book by Zbigniew Brzezinski, Between Two Ages, how whenever you have a massive upheaval in technology and therefore human behavior changes, because like the Industrial Revolution, you had all kinds of new tools to use. So thus everyday life changed for the vast majority of people in the now industrialized nations. Whenever you have that type of system change, it always manifests a new belief system, in a new ideology. And in the Industrial Revolution, obviously that one was Marxism. And then with the technological age that we're probably, I believe is closing now, you had the scientific atheism, if you will, the scientism especially. Well, let's just all believe what the scientists think is real. And we were very much, emotionally beat down into that position, like kind of talked about earlier, like prayer is bad, anyone that's religious is a moron and ignorant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you watched anything on television from like the 90s and 2000s, like that was like what it was all about. Maybe I'm remembering that. I remember being like, man, these guys hate religion.
Dude, you're not wrong. You're not wrong, because even a lot of kids shows, just looking back at shows, video, I guess not video, but cartoon shows that I watched during like the late 90s, typically the children inside them still had somewhat of a reverence for their parents. You look at shows now, like the last one back when I was still actively watching Cartoon Network was probably, I think it was called Johnny Test, and there is such a lack of respect for the parents. The kids just blow off mom and dad at every opportunity, and it's a wonder that kids, through being bombarded by that day in, day out, act so poorly around their parents and require having to have a screen and headphones on when they're out to a family dinner. I encounter that all the time when I used to wait tables, and I walk up to a table and everybody would be head down. The kids, they couldn't handle eating but the simplest bland meal because none of their horizons were ever stretched. Like, I had some jackwagon ask me when I was working at PF Chang's if he says, well, you guys got chicken nuggets, you guys got fries too? Like, dude, you're at a Chinese restaurant, man, and those are not chicken nuggets. That is Pei Wei chicken. All right, what is wrong with you? Yeah.
Well, the story I'm building to is that what's happening next, the technologies that are about to be, brought into the light and used en masse, that is to say the blockchain, central bank, digital currency, everything's going to be on the blockchain, by the way. I mean, like, the technologies there are, efficient. Just engineering efficiency, technological efficiency demands that this happens. But all of that stuff is going to manifest a new behavior, a new ideology will come from it. And it is probably going to be a totally vacuous, don't care about anything except for me, 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 me. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if there is, we know how corrupt our governments are, right? It wouldn't be a surprise to me if all of this corruption is actually, and I mean the dirty, nastiness, which I won't even get into here. All of this stuff is brought to the light of day, and after a world war, something like that, just guessing here, but and then you have an individual that comes and cleanses the governments of the world of all these evil satanic whats, and then is like, you know what, you should just all worship me. And I don't know if I don't keep up pop culture anymore, I don't, but I saw this, it's called Tomorrowland. I don't know if you're familiar with Tomorrowland, but it's like
it's with George Clooney.
No, it's a music festival.
Oh, I was thinking the movie. Sorry.
Continue. Oh yeah, no. Sorry, it's a music festival, and it's all that EDM, electronic dance music. And it's just an interesting side note. You can find Jim Morrison in an interview. Obviously, he died in like 72, whatever it was. I don't know, but so it's before then. Just talking about the future of music, and he said that one day there's going to be just a man's going to come on to the stage, and he's going to have all this electronic equipment, and he's with that electronic equipment, he's going to provide all the sounds that a band would otherwise provide, and that's what this electronic dance music stuff is. But in this Tomorrowland, I saw this clip of the stage, because they make all these intricate stages and stuff. And I don't know, that music is kind of like totally, induces schizophrenia. But this, like, the stage like came alive, and there's like this big face talking about how, like, there's an individual that is going to come, that is going to unite us all. And you have 200,000 kids just whacked out of their mind on drugs, and having the Dionysian festival, if you will, and the time of their life. And this is what they're being plugged with. This is what they're being programmed with, is this spirituality, if you will, but it's obviously a diabolical spirituality. So like how I mentioned, like, it was kind of like this very much atheist, anti-religion tinge to all the shows and stuff that was in, like, when I was a kid, at least. It seems like it's giving way to this new age spirituality, which to me it might be coming of the Antichrist. I don't have absolutely no idea, but it's interesting to speculate about. And with this advent of this new powerful payment technology system, and money runs the world. Money runs all our matter now. It is the top of the power holon, if you will, the power structure that dominates human reality, sits money. That's, again, materially speaking, because I would, dollars to donuts, the masters of finance have some direct interlocution with Satan himself, or his minions. But when this technology is unleashed, all of the fourth industrial revolution stuff falls into place, and all the middlemen, like the bankers that you see when you go to your bank, the real estate agents, all of these things that are in the middle, investment advisors, all this stuff, and you just have these powerful NFTs and stuff that represent your ownership of your house, your car, your proof of insurance, like that type of thing. And you can move anything of value anywhere in the world at the speed of an email, and so for very cheap. And so all of this is going to manifest a new, in my opinion, and I'd like to think that Zbigniew Brzezinski would agree with me, but a new ideology and a new global governance structure. Certainly, if there's this year, 2024, I think it's going to be a very important year. If some black swan event type of things happen, we could be very rapidly accelerating into this. And I would, by my guess, 2030, I would say this is very easily, by 2030, the standard across the globe.
Wow.
I know the Chinese central bank digital currency is ready to go. I think they're launching actually next year, if not this year. I would guess the United States maybe a year or two behind that. And then there's going to be international regulations, and how all of this stuff works together across borders, because money moves across borders to the tune of trillions of dollars a day, right? So there's got to be some international schema for this. And thus there's likely going to be an international governance structure on top of that as well. And so to get to that point, I would guess, World War III, whatever, I don't know. Some major horrible event like that is coming to pass. And so, and unfortunately, if people aren't armed with, the knowledge that we talk about, they might think that Donald Trump's going to save them from it or something. I don't know.
That's it right there. Like, it's wild when you think about how easy the pitch becomes for world governments, to throw out the idea of a centralized banking system, which is a digital currency, because chief among them is going to be, hey, it's immune to inflation because you have the blockchain. You can see exactly where every single one of those coins and sovereigns are going to. But at the same time, much like in George Orwell's 1984, the idea of privacy goes out the window. Because if you're working and operating on a blockchain, everybody can see what you've purchased at any given time of day. And right down to buying a cup of coffee. Maybe it's on a phone, or maybe your hand is chipped and you go to a McDonald's and you buy a hamburger. Suddenly, boop, Dan Stanislowski bought a hamburger in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And he paid $2.75 for it in this universal currency. And so, like,
Yeah,
for many, that's going to be a huge tantalizing reason as to why they want to get behind it, because suddenly, oh yeah, and we can dispense with our national debt.
yeah,
We can dispense with having such high gas prices. This is gonna fix everything.
yeah,
Tax rates are gonna plummet because we don't have to worry about inflation because nobody can mint these things. This is
yeah,
on a individual system.
yeah.
Um, a question for you would be, like, for the individual, like, and, back on the idea of providing tools for people to use. What would you say is a bulwark for the individual to help them protect against the easy descent into letting themselves just fall in line and be made to think or behave in a way that is completely contra to what's written on the inside of their heart?
Well, I would say start. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Great question. I would say start making yourself uncomfortable. Start getting used to going out, and you'll find that it's actually more rewarding than not doing it. You because especially when you get some courage too, you build a um, can't look for the word, but confidence. Sorry, yeah, self confidence, right? And you grow as an individual. So I would say, first of all, get used to being uncomfortable. Get used to doing things you don't want to do. Get used to confronting people, even if, because 99% of the time people just avoid conflict. Period. Full stop. Right. Well, they're bringing the conflict to us, right? They're bringing it to us hugely. So get used to um, having the skill set, keeping your cool in debate, or even in a positive way. Go out and help someone. You know, someone, old lady, you know, or drops her, and just start building up this confidence, right? And because honestly, I don't know that there is. I don't want to, sound like a pessimist, but I don't know if there's much we can do to like stop this central bank digital currency paradigm. I think like basically it's here, for lack of a better term. But what we
Mm-mm.
can do is begin to build communities of like-minded individuals, because you know I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know what, like, exactly how we're going to stop this, but we have to. We must stop it. It's a matter of not necessarily our own eternal damnation or not, but certainly, I mean, just untold millions and millions and millions of souls who need help.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's and when you live in a system where you never get to hear the name of our Lord, Savior, and Redeemer, right? That's horrible, right? And there are so many people that actually currently live like that, and we need to do what we can to break into we need to put the way that these behaviorists would put it, we need to put the stimuli in their environments, right? We need to
Mm.
put stimuli into the environment so that there is some hope for them to change their minds, to open their hearts and minds to the truth, right? And that's not going to happen if we're sitting on the couch and just
Yeah.
being totally passive constantly. So do it. Get up off that couch. Go out and just go. Start by listening to some seminar, maybe with someone you disagree with totally, and then just you don't know anyone there. No one there knows you. Debate with them in front of everyone else. Just bring, even if the first time you do it, you're probably gonna get creamed. You're probably gonna look bad. You're probably gonna say something stupid. But guess what? You learn, right? And learn knowledge about yourself, your needs, how you can approach these situations, and you assimilate that knowledge, and you go out and do it again, and you just keep improving yourself that way, right? And eventually, you will be very good at what you're doing. You will know a lot more about what you're talking about. You will have confidence to tell the truth when so many people around you don't. So
Yeah.
that would be my advice on that front.
That's good. Well, and as you've mentioned before, with the idea of a revolution that would have to take place in order to completely stop this physically from enacting, you would have, like, no country can succeed in this modern era unless you have majority support of armed forces in any given country. Like,
Mhm.
so the idea that we'd be able to stop it, it's somewhat of a pipe dream.
Mhm.
But I like what you were talking about there is what we do in the face of it.
Yeah.
What do you do personally? I'm huge, to sort of parrot off what you were saying. I'm huge into self-education and self-improvement, both mentally and physically.
Mhm.
It's so easy to remain docile and remain in just one seated position on a couch. It
Mhm.
takes so little time to even get just the tiniest bit of exercise, which releases so many good endorphins inside your brain and goes a long way to reduce joint inflammation and heart disease.
Mhm.
Another big thing, and actually I posted the scripture here inside the comment section, I'm going to put it up here, is uh, it's laid out for us even in Proverbs chapter 23, verses 22 through 25, which is talking about buying wisdom, buying knowledge, and never selling it. It says, listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Buy truth and do not sell it. Buy wisdom, instruction, and understanding. The father of the righteous will greatly rejoice. He who fathers a wise son will be glad in him. Let your father and mother be glad. Let her who bore you rejoice. So to say, folks, you've got to arm yourselves with knowledge. Invest in some hard to handle books. Invest in, like Dan said, there's a plenty of online seminars that you could even purchase on there that go down the rabbit hole on any number of topics. Invest in that. Invest in your mind so that when somebody does try to approach you with some concept that is being really sneakily slid under the carpet to you, which is in effect going to chain you down and take away rights and freedoms from you, you could see that coming. You'll have the wherewithal and you'll have the gray matter snapping to be able to see the ploy, see the lie, and either avoid it or counteract it.
Yeah.
Like
Absolutely.
that's tantamount on my list is you have to absorb knowledge.
Yeah, very well said. And also another part of that too is, it's a process of waking up, of detaching. As I was talking about the attachment that, like literally our culture is all about attaching your heart to these just trivial, nonsensical, purely for pleasure, vain things, and it hurts. It is very much waking up and a rebirth, if you will, a death of the old man of sin and becoming new. And it is uncomfortable. It is very
Mhm.
uncomfortable, but it is a process that we all must undergo. And especially if you don't, before the end of your life, you're going to have some things to answer for, which you
Absolutely.
which you don't want that, so
Absolutely.
it's best to do this now, and you will feel so much better. I mean, it sucks for a week, it sucks for 2 weeks, however long it takes. Each person will be different, but when you come out the other end of it, you are so much stronger. You are so much more bold. You do have so much more wisdom. You do have the ability to articulate even more. Um, so yeah, it's definitely well worth the effort to do it. And like I
Mhm.
said, if we don't, we're toast.
Oh
There's
yeah.
a man named Dennis Bushnell. He might still be alive. I'm not sure, but he was the chief science officer of a little place called NASA. I don't know if you ever heard NASA. From
I
like
get people mention
1967
it.
to like yeah, he was the CSO from like 1967 to like 2017 or 20 something like that, just like an absurdly long
Oh,
time. So the guy knows a few things. But he gave a talk in like 2003, and it was all about like future warfare stuff,
oh
of
wow.
course. And it was huge, like so much different subjects in this talk. But one of them was on the ages of mankind. And of course, we had the nomadic age and the agrarian age, and then we had the industrial revolution, and then we had the technological age, right? And then so we had this technological age, which he said would end at about what year? I think it was 2020, exactly 2020. And then the 2020 would begin the nano age. And what he had as the last age of mankind, because he wasn't sure when the nano age would end, but he had the last age of mankind was the virtual age.
Hmm.
Now, I was actually really really surprised when um, Facebook became Meta and they introduced the metaverse, because the metaverse is you essentially live in this virtual reality, excuse me, future present, that would be your present. You live in this virtual reality existence for your whole life, and you just, you click a few things in your metaverse and DoorDash brings you your food, and you just have to take the headset off for 10 seconds to go get your food and come back and just plug in. And there's apps on there where you can even go to your work in the metaverse, and as long as your work cool with you in a metaverse world, which if we're all working from home anyway, then that's, I can't see why they wouldn't be. Then there's literally no reason for a human being that's in the metaverse, in this VR world, to ever leave it. And someone who lives in the VR world is someone who is totally neutralized, right? They don't consume any natural existence whatsoever anymore, actually. And so all of their senses are stimulated by totally artificial stimuli, and certainly their intellects are receiving totally artificial knowledge too. And this is the plan. This is the way they want us to go. The Dennis Bushnell / Bertrand Russells of the world want every human being right now in the VR world if they could do it, because then their victory is guaranteed. Nothing will stop them. And it was actually a very iconic image of Mark Zuckerberg. And Mark Zuckerberg to me is like Elon Musk and whatever, Donald Trump, all these guys, they're just actors seeking to bring this system in. But it was an awesome, very awesome, and it's a powerful image of when he was debuting this or demoing this metaverse. He was in an auditorium, and everyone was sitting there with the VR goggles on, and he was the only free man, if you will, without one, standing up straight and tall and walking around in a room that he's of people, little lackeys that he has now dominated with his virtual reality system. I was like, when I saw that metaverse, because the metaverse was like, I don't know, a year and a half ago, something like that. I mean, metaverse is failing, which is fine because it's just a beta, if you will, to see the consciousness of humanity. Hey, this is coming. This is something that's coming down the pike, but it's rapidly approaching.
Man. So, and that sort of jumps back to what we touched on a little bit earlier, where if you can keep people so loaded with pleasure that they reach a point where they don't care what's going on around them, then you have complete license, carte blanche to run roughshod over them, and they'll just gladly accept it. One of the things that Bertrand Russell, which you also talked about on your show, that he mentioned in his book, is he said, diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the desired behaviors, beliefs, and thought patterns that the oligarchs want.
Yes.
And you look at our food, we've created since the 1920s, I think something like 60,000 different manufactured food products, these processed food products. And we're using oils and we're using chemicals inside these things that are meant for machinery, like soybean oil, the worst thing you could put inside your body. But yet you pick up any number of kids' fruit snacks, any number of kids' snack in general inside the aisle at Walmart, and soy is chief among them, as well as a litany of other seed oils, which we've actually found scientifically that if you don't consume seed oils, you have almost no need for sunscreen.
Yeah. Really?
Period. Yeah.
Wow,
seed oils. Yep. Seed oils, they damage your skin severely so. Because we're creatures that are meant to be outside. We're meant to be out there in the sun. We're meant to be hunting and gathering, or at least we were during those very early times. Like, how effective were we going to be if we're on some carnivore based diet, not able to even stand out in the sun? But
so actually, I want to read that quote that you mentioned. I want to read the whole thing if possible, because it is because the people, like, this is 1952. When this was written. Bertrand Russell also, so this book is Impact of Science on Society, is 1952. Bertrand Russell had a book that was kind of like the prequel to this, which he wrote in 1930, and it was called The Scientific Outlook. And in that one is where he really gets into the rule by, and how, like, people won't be able to change a diaper, a nappy is what he called it, a nappy, without expert opinion one day, because they'll just be trained so sufficiently through the education system to be like, no, you must believe with all your heart what the expert tells you to believe. But here we go, 1952, Impact of Science on Society. It says, scientific societies are as yet in their infancy. may be worthwhile to spend a few moments in speculating as to possible future developments of those that are oligarchies. Now, he's not really speculating. He's this is the future that they're trying to actively bring in, and the one that we've all been raised in, by the way. It is to be expected that advances in physiology and psychology will give governments much more control over individual mentality than they now have, even in totalitarian countries. Fichte was a Prussian philosopher who came up with essentially what our education system was modeled after. Fichte laid it down that education should aim at destroying free will so that after pupils have left school, they shall be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. But in his day, this was an unattainable ideal. What he regarded as the best system in existence produced Karl Marx. In future, such failures are not likely to occur where there is dictatorship. Here we go. Diet, injections, and injunctions. So injunctions are like laws, right? Injections are obviously the V word. So these three things, diet, injections, injunctions, will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable. And any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Even if all are miserable, all will believe themselves happy because the government will tell them that they are so. So you have just just total. It's
Wow.
actually like brutal. It's a brutalization. They are brutalizing us with this system. They're brutalizing people. They're the pleasure based. Just keep clicking the pleasure button. They're brutalizing us. And it's a it's a crime against humanity without compare. What we've been subjected to. It's absolutely evil and criminal. And in the political polarization, we get into this psychopathy.
Mhm.
What happens in societies that are ran by a political system that is dominated by a psychopathic elite, what um, Andrew Lobachevsky calls a pathocracy. Pathocracy. What happens to the individuals down at our level is that they become unable to carry on a discourse that makes them uncomfortable, and they use two major um, um, uh, little leaps of intellect, if you will, but they're not leaps. I'm not describing this well. But first is the substitution of premises. So you present them with data, and they either just flat out say that's not real data, and so you're nuts, so leave me alone, or they could even follow you along the line. All this data you present a beautiful story, very nicely logical, a lot of nice data in there, and they come to a conclusion that's uncomfortable, and then they ignore you, right? And I'm sure we all have, ignore the conclusion. I'm sure we all have had conversations like this. I'm sure we've all met people like this. I'm sure they're within our own families, a lot of them, who are unable to understand that, the C-19 phenomenon 2020 was contrived and evil, and it was used to, usher us into a new economic paradigm and to put injectable products into us that are, potentially going to harm us, if not kill us. Like
Yeah.
people can't bridge that gap because they project the value systems onto everyone around them, especially those presented to them in digital format from these powerful little screens. People
Mhm.
people on that are above reproach. You know,
It's like if it's packaged and it's got a cute little logo and it's got a fun little hashtag and it's got a great little saying to it, they'll take that. They'll take that digital little thing hitting them over somebody sitting right next to them with all
yes,
the evidence inside their hand to say, no, 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 this is the way it is.
yes,
It happens the way that you just laid it out. And then you even have the further extreme where because they can't handle the information that you've presented, and because it's made them uncomfortable, and because they don't have any way to articulate another possible idea to, I guess, either pick apart or undermine what you've said, they stop their ears and they scream.
yeah,
You see this all the time if you look through lectures that Jordan Peterson has given, or lectures that like somebody like Michael Knowles or Ben Shapiro has, where the entire audience completely bereft of the ability to even articulate what has them so enraged, and then how they might get beyond that. They just start screaming, they start chanting and shouting, they start banging on windows.
mhm,
Um, it's total insanity. And
Yeah.
right from the get-go,
Yeah.
in a place where the university setting where it was supposed to be for the purposes of higher education and learning, now they're being taught that the most real thing in the world is your feelings. Anybody who challenges that is some sort of asshole who should not be listened to, and you should get violent if you have to. Like when we have politicians that say, oh well, if you stand with me, then what I want you to do is I want you to go find somebody. If they're sitting down with their family at a restaurant, you make a scene, you whip up a crowd, you make it known that they're not welcome there. That's
Yeah.
total insanity. But then you have
Yeah.
all the poor plebeians who listen to that garbage from a person who knows full well what the sum total is inside this game that they're playing, who is not going to personally do that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if we think that politicians out there are taking the jab, we're out of our minds.
Mm-hmm.
No, this is a whole lot of do as I say and not as I do ism.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that are being fed that cute little package thing, it's got the logo, it's got the hashtag, it's got the great little saying. Yep, they will swallow that down because it's the uncomfortability that they're afraid of. It's the
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortability that comes with personal growth. It's like when
Mm-hmm.
I work out, am I typically jazzed that I've got to get up at 6 a.m. to get my workout in before my son wakes up? No, absolutely not. But I know that when I finish that workout, I've done something good for myself and I'm going to become stronger for it. And in so doing, also, you build this neural pathway of dedication to something. You build this neural pathway into a dedication to a practice that is doing good for you and by extension, good for those around you. Because
Mm-hmm.
now I'm stronger for when I'm slinging freight at work. I can pick up those 4-ton heavy duty jacks with not a problem anymore. Not like I had a year and a half ago when the store opened. But it's like you mentioned, you have to engage with the uncomfortability and you have to
Yeah.
press on forward with it.
Oh yeah. And they've consumed the lie, the lie of Americanism, if you will. And it's really American. I say that, but America's culture was exported across the globe. We now have, like a total global hedging culture. The schema that Gromsky said like needed to be. Sorry, my hair's a little weird. Um, the scheme that need to be in place for a global governance structure is that essentially everyone on planet Earth has essentially the same culture, and we now have that. I mean, like the people in China, again, they live basically the same lives we do. They wake up, to eat their Pop Tart, eat their Tang, they turn on their little news, they flip open their phone, whatever, get their updates. They go to work in their cubicle 40 hours a week. They come home, they eat their microwave dinner, watch their sports ball, do whatever nastiness they're going to do and go to bed. And then just repeat, repeat, repeat. We all have this same thing. Like, the only difference between us and China is like our guys kick the ball in the net better than your guys or something,
Dude. Oh, and you hit on something too. You said it inside your talk. So, like, you didn't exactly say it the way I'm going to phrase it, but you alluded to it. And it's the idea that if you want to control people, keep them as busy as humanly possible so that they don't have time to think about these higher level ideas and concepts and wake up and
Mhm.
finally come online. It's
Yeah.
why you see so many people, we're working twice as hard as we did back in the 60s for less than half the gain when it comes to a 40-day work week. And you
Yeah.
have people that they're barely making enough to survive, and it's by design. Inflation is absolutely by design. We
Mhm.
know that when we're dealing with fiat money, which is actually illegal to have, we're dealing with a system that is designed to keep you enslaved to your 40-hour work week, because you
Mhm.
can only make just so much to continue existing unless
Mhm.
you're one of the few who is able to become an entrepreneur, or who is able to invest properly or make those proper adjustments within your life to secure financial gain for yourself and for your posterity.
Yeah.
Most people, they're not doing that. They
Right.
can't do that. They're
Right.
working so hard, much like the Red Queen says to Alice in Through the Looking Glass. They're working so hard just to stay in one spot.
Mhm.
And they have to strive as hard as possible just to do so. So
Yeah.
how in the blazes will they even have the
Yeah.
time to look elsewhere unless they make that time and engage with that uncomfortability?
Oh yeah. It's too bad. I saw one study. I'm not going to get the exact quotes right here on the data, but it's something like this. It's like every time, like the Federal Reserve. And this is a study I think the Federal Reserve itself put out. Is every time like an interest rate is raised by like 0.5% or something like that, it literally costs 40,000 lives. Some like
Wow.
something like that. When they make money that much harder to get,
Wow.
it literally kills people, right? And they know this, they know this. And there's also this aspect too of how many personal crises can people handle at any given time. And the most, there's one study that showed like the most crises that a person can handle is 2 at any given time. So if you have some crisis happening in your personal life, then you turn on the television and there's 9/11 or C-19 or whatever it is, people personalize the tragedies that are on TV also, of course, right? And so it's a recipe. And so you're putting the strain on their monetary lives. So it's basically almost as bad as it's ever been. Besides like Great Depression era. I mean, certainly some things were worse in the past, of course, but we're increasing the strain on people's personal lives. Couples fight the most about money over any
Hmm.
before any other thing. Period. Full stop. So if you're having a crisis with your wife or your husband, that's a personal crisis, and you add on that, a COVID or whatever it is, and people, it's a recipe to destroy the psyche of humanity.
Well,
And
yeah.
and
Introduce
so
a third issue there that has them wound up, and you're going to see suicide rates just completely skyrocket. It's like
absolutely,
we saw, because I mean, if we can only really handle two big ticket issues at any given time, a third one becomes insurmountable. And we saw over 2020, we saw suicide and substance abuse and death from substance abuse skyrocket,
yes,
absolutely
absolutely.
skyrocket.
I'm glad you brought that up because to me, it's a very telling statistic. And I found this in the book COVID-19: The Great Reset. And that book's actually very in your face. That's a World Economic Forum book. All those books are very in your face. They're telling you what's coming. Most people read them. You should read them.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I found a study in there that they reference that they predicted. The World Health Organization in 2017 put out a study that they were predicting by like the year 2030, the number one cause of death of humans on planet Earth is going to be deaths of despair, and that
Mm.
would be the suicide, drug overdose, alcohol deaths, etc. That type of thing. They predicted it's going to be the number one cause of death on planet Earth by the year 2030 because they are going to make it a living nightmare for us to be here. They're doing it already actively, and so again they know this and look at the mechanisms. This has been increasing. It's been increasing over the course of X amount of years, certainly since the beginning of the World Health Organization. And what are the tools they use to try and stop this thing? Well, it's the same what we talked about at the beginning of the show, this hyper specialized nonsense where they have you go take SSRIs or amphetamines, and as long as they're coming from the person in the white lab coat, it's all good, right? But if you get them illegally on the street, though, it's a naughty boy. But it's still it's an absurd way of approaching the problem. But that's what the experts do. That's what the professionals do. And because they haven't given us the power to think for ourselves and research for ourselves and understand things for ourselves, they supply the experts. Then people are just trained to go to the hospital. That's where your expert's going to be, and they're going to give you a solution. Well, the solution doesn't work. The solution is actually asinine
Mhm.
at face value, And so deaths of despair will continue to skyrocket, and they want to make sure that they continue to skyrocket. It's the plan. To me, I read that study as saying this is the plan, folks. I read the
Yeah.
Bertrand Russells and the Kesslers and say this is the plan. This is how
We're breaking up a little bit.
what they're they have subjected us to and what they're going to continue to subject us to. And
Mm. Sorry,
you hear me?
folks. We have a little
Sorry.
bit of a break. Yeah, sorry, it's got a little glitchy there. But I'm glad you brought up SSRIs there specifically,
Oh yeah,
because I wanted to have you talk a little bit about this as well, because it makes it like health is obviously so important, and you have to arm yourself with knowledge that you know how to make the right choices for you and your family. Like my family, we're really not one for vaccines. Now certain inoculations, I understand that if you have to go into certain fields that you need certain inoculations. Like I don't think I was actually vaccinated until I went to high school, but by that point I'd gone pretty well through puberty already, and so going in to get like whatever the thing was, we'll say maybe it was like tetanus or whooping cough, whatever it was, to check that box, my body was already pretty well able to handle that. But there's a huge difference between being inoculated against something and getting a faux vaccine that only sort of protects you but not really. um the one of the concepts that inside the Ghost in the Machine that got brought up was effects on RNA inside the brain. Could you touch a little bit about that? Because I gathered that through drugs that affect the RNA inside the brain, people could end up being pretty well directly controlled.
Yeah. So because RNA is basically the intermediary between DNA and protein, right? And so utilizing this RNA, they intend to have your cells exactly what we're um, coming to understand about this technology more. Again, I'm gonna try to be careful with my words.
Sure,
um,
sure.
um, because so you can generate whatever protein you want, and proteins are like the kind of the worker machines, if you will, of your cell, right? And so, like, just in theory, I I don't understand. They don't explain it really well in this book. In this little excerpt they put in there from the researcher that Kessler was citing, because you can do something like they're doing with the C19 injectables, which is just they're putting RNA that makes a protein that is just absolutely toxic and is going to destroy everything. But as far as unless they have some mechanism to target specific regions of the brain, which is possible. Like if they can get the bolus of injection there, I mean that I say it's possible, but it's like incredibly unlikely unless they injecting it like right directly into that part of the brain.
Now the
Um,
bolus, that's where the vaccine actually ends up inside the body.
yeah, like whatever, like exactly. So that's what this is kind of what I opine about, like at the end of my reading of The Ghost in the Machine, is that to me this was already being done when Kessler wrote this. Because unlike you, I'm actually completely 100% against vaccines. Period. I think they've actually destroyed, or have not destroyed. Destroyed is not the right word. They've greatly altered slash damaged the gene pool of humanity
Mhm.
through mass vaccination,
I have to agree.
through a phenomenon called epigenetics, right? And so genetics is genetic. Your genetic code is just your string of DNA, right? The A, T's, G's, and C's, the unique combination of those A, T, G's, and C's that make you, right? Well, epigenetics is not that, right? Epigenetics is how your genes are turned on and off. It's mechanisms that control the expression of a gene. And a gene, again, is a part of your DNA that gets read and turned into a functional protein. Okay. And through this and the reason I say that is because epigenetics are inherited much like your genetic code is inherited, right? And so no one, as far as I can tell, no one's looked into this. This is why if I had a lab and I had a bunch of people that are awesome at their like techniques and equipment, they'd kill me. They'd kill me. They'd have to kill me because I'd ask questions like this, like what are vaccines? All these poor rats. I'd be dealing with these rats. They'd be getting all kinds of horrible vaccines, and I'd be breaking their bones open and pulling their bone marrow out and looking at their epigenetics, their brain structures and stuff. But like so, the epigenetics changes very much. It changes rapidly, not rapidly. Some parts would change rapidly to the environment, right? And so to the stimuli that you're putting into your body, your epigenetics change. Your DNA code does not change, right? And so if we're inheriting epigenetic structures that cause a reduced expression of good genes or an increased expression of bad genes, and really any change in protein content that is outside of a normal homeostasis is bad. And I think vaccines, especially first day of life, America has the lowest the worst infant mortality rate of any industrialized nation, because we're the only one that does a standard issue first day of life injection of 25 micrograms of aluminum into a beautiful baby for a sexually transmitted disease. It's
Mhm.
nonsense. Just go through your doctor. Like, do you know what hepatitis B is? It's an STD. My 3-hour-old isn't going to be doing that. Like, are you a doctor or are you a moron, or is there a difference? I mean, so it's that simple. It's like, what are these things doing to our epigenetic code? What does that thing do to the epigenetics of that baby's immune system, that baby's neurological system, that baby's circulatory system, respiratory system? Go on down the line. No one knows the answers to these questions, right? And so, to me, I'm against it, all of them, just at face value. It's like, to me, and it's also they're not even the same chemistry. The reason the aluminum, and there used to be a lot more mercury, so I think there's only mercury in the trivalent flu shots, but there used to be a lot more. They put these toxins in there because, and they gave them the Orwellian name of alum, in the case of aluminum, because like, yeah, we know it's there, we know we're putting aluminum in there. There are journals and conferences on how toxic aluminum is, right? And they're telling you they're doing this because it has to stimulate an immune response, because a dead virus or a protein from a virus isn't going to stimulate an immune response. Well, guess what, folks? When a virus goes into your body, is it spewing out aluminum? No, of course not. And so we're talking about like two distinct chemical reactions that are happening in your body. One when a virus or a bacteria enters your body, and one when a virus plus aluminum enters your body, right? It's going to be different. So that's why vaccines don't give lifelong immunity, right? Because it isn't the same thing, and why you need boosters over and over and over and over and over again until you're dead. I mean, that's one of the reasons why. There's a lot of other reasons, but there's actually tons of mechanisms within the shots, all these shots that have always been there. Even when Koestler was writing this stuff, this was known, and it doesn't. I mean, this stuff is so simple. They knew about it back then. When they started the vaccination programs en masse for the diphtheria, I'm sure your listeners probably know a lot about this too. But I can't remember the
Tdap.
Yeah, there's I think it was 4 in the 50s. They started 4 when they did the mass vaccination campaign. It was polio, diphtheria, some other ones I can't remember off the top of my head. But if you look at the incidence of these things, like the 20s, 30s is coming down, 40s is coming down, 50s it's basically at 0. They start the mass vaccination campaigns, it goes to 0, and they look like, hey, look at what vaccines did, and it's like, absolutely not. That's not what vaccines did. Sanitation did that. Nutrition did that.
Right. Washing our hands, soap. Yes, all these wonderful things. That's what resulted in the decline in these things. Human health, the terrain theory, right? The bolstering of the body, the bolstering of the immune system. That is what is responsible, by and large, for the defeat of those pathogens. It ain't vaccines. Vaccines, however, to me, I look at them as an absolute bio weapon. And can they? I mean, as far as like, the autism phenomenon, for example, the evil genius of vaccines, and this has been one of the things that have always been evil genius about vaccines, is that if vaccine damage presented itself always exclusively as one thing, namely autism, it'd be obvious, right? But depending on where that bolus of shot ends up and what tissue it embeds itself in and begins destroying, those are the symptoms that are going to manifest. So you have something that's designed to change your immune system for the rest of your life, but we can't investigate as if it's causing a deleterious effect on your immune system, which all of these man-made diseases like multiple sclerosis, the arthritis, all the blah blah blah. Of course, there are potentially other sources that can cause these things, but again, the thing that we're injecting right past all our natural defense mechanisms, right into our bloodstream, first day of life, we begin the regimen that's designed to change your immune system. That's what is causing the vast majority of these things. And so in terms of controlling someone's mind, yeah, you put out someone's mind. It is murder when you cause autism in someone. That is murdering someone. So if that's kind of what Koestler was referring to, because I don't think it's possible to improve someone's intellectual capacities by injecting them full of poison. No, definitely. I mean, like beyond having a demonic experience where you're imparted with some sort of information when you force that third eye open, taking LSD or DMT, as you mentioned, and Koestler talks about drugs, they can't put into the mind something that isn't already there. Neither mystical insights, nor philosophic wisdom, nor creative power can be provided by a pill or an injection. But
Yes.
it's so sinister because you mentioned this as well, and that goes in the machine episode, which I encourage you guys to go and listen to, because it's very, very intense. But the damaging of RNA structures inside the brain, changing people's biochemistry inside their mind to make them way more compliant to suggestions, way more compliant to those injunctions, way easier to fool and cajole and make behave however they want to. Uh, it, it's one of those things where unless you're taking the risk to arm yourself with information and make those right choices for your family, you could very easily fall prey to that. And I don't think that that's out of the realm of possibility. I think that's exactly what they've been doing to a lot of people. And
Oh
then
yeah.
when you have them already softened up in the head, it takes just the small amount of fear and suggestion to make them go totally off the scales and do
Mhm.
something that inherently they would never ever do if they had a fully functioning brain.
Right. Yeah. And we're there. I mean, there's so many people like the autism epidemic is absolutely exploding. I like when I was still so I moved to Ohio now, but like I remember reading when I was back in Grand Forks, North Dakota. I remember reading an article in the local newspaper, which is weird because I never do that, but for some reason I was. But it was about how like there were so many special needs students that were graduating from like sixth grade and going into middle school, that the middle school like wasn't prepared for the amount of special needs teachers that they had. Like, and just so just like 1 year, there was such a huge difference in in the population of the mental health and the intellectual capacities within 1 year that the school system couldn't handle it. And I was like, how
My
does that
gosh.
how does that happen? Right? I mean, what is the explanation of that particular phenomenon there? And to me, I wish I wasn't like I wish this wasn't the case, but it's like, was there some new shot put on the regimen that the youth are subjected to? You know, it's I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but to me, that's the most likely scenario. And it's just so. And when you have that, when you have someone who's autistic, obviously, again, that's a person that's not a human, really. I mean, they don't have the consciousness, they don't have the age of reason, if you will, the ability to make decisions potentially for forever, you know. And so,
Mhm.
yes, then they are then subject to the wills of those around them, and if those who are around them have their will subject to the education system, the propaganda machine, it's over. You know, I mean, it's truly very very dark scenario
Well, they're
there.
100% dependent. They're
Yeah,
100% dependent on those who would provide care for them. Like,
yeah.
this is staggering. The church I attend, it seems like 1 in every 3 to 4 kids there, I've heard the parents say they have autism. And I remember when I was growing up, I never even heard the word autism
Hmm.
until I was in my first year of college. It was not a thing. I'd never
Yeah,
heard of it. And the
right.
first time I heard it mentioned, I felt a little bad because I laughed. Now, it was during a speech class that a gal was giving a speech on autism, and she had a lazy
Hmm.
eye. So she turns and she goes, Asperger's. And I was like, what? What?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
thought it was a big gag. And then she, like with her cross eyes, she started getting really serious about the whole thing.
yeah,
I'd never even heard of it, but now it is absolutely everywhere. It's
yeah.
absolutely everywhere, and
Mhm.
you have an entire generation, potentially, that is at risk for being stuck in a form of mental retardation for the rest of their life. Like,
Yeah,
are they going to reproduce? Are they going to have their
no,
genes proliferated inside the next generation?
right.
It like and folks, if you haven't figured it already, a lot of these guys, like we mentioned at the top of this here, they're involved in these secret societies which people want to try and wish away or dispel away. They're very very real,
Hmm.
and who they serve is very very real as well.
Hmm.
And the big and short of it is they want as many people dead as possible. They want as many casualties on the board as possible because then it makes it easier for them to get what they want out of their lives. Which, when you look at it, it's a really, really shallow goal that most of these organizations have because it distills down to wealth and comfort. Like, oh, yeah, we're going to go ahead and destroy the entire world because we just want to be super wealthy and just have things given to us and sit in this permanent state of pleasure, no shortage of sexual companions, no shortage of entertainment. Like, that's really what we want. Like, what a shallow end to reach for, but that's what they're doing because that's what the father of lies has led them to believe.
No,
So another bulwark I would say against this, and to help people arm themselves is have a healthy prayer life. Be prayed up. If you're a Christian, if you're actually a Christian, are you a Christian in name only, or are you Christian in function as well? Because there was a statistic a few years back that about 94% of practicing Christians did not read their Bible with any regularity whatsoever. They got their clutch of 4 or 5 verses from the pulpit every Sunday, 2 fast songs, 1 slow song. We all take communion, 1 more song, we're out the door. Drop your donation in the joy box. And that's it. And then they're re-up for the week. Oh, I got my dose of the Holy Spirit. I have my worship encounter, as Elevation Worship likes to put it. And now I get to go live like a total jackwagon the whole rest of the week. Come back on Sunday, get refueled up. God is good. God is great. Thank you for this day today. And then go right on back with it. If you're not in an active prayer life and you're not actively consuming the word on a regular basis, it is so easy to fall prey to this. Be armed up. That's what Ephesians 6:20 is describing when it says put on the full armor of God. Like, that is the only way that you arm up. How do you have a belt of truth? Well, you have to consume truth. How do you have a shield of faith that you can stand behind? You have to know where your faith lies. How do you use that sword of the Spirit to divide flesh and joint and marrow and sinew? You have to actively know where those sharp edges of it are and how to utilize it. It only comes from hearing by the word of God and being prayed up.
Absolutely, yes, very well said. It's I think most Christians live basically a pagan lifestyle, as you mentioned now, and with very little, effort to pray on their own, unless their kid gets diagnosed with cancer.
Right, only when they need something.
Yeah,
only when they need something.
Right, and it's just obviously not the way to live. So, yeah, I agree. A prayer is an absolute necessity, 100%.
Gotcha. Well, we got a few minutes yet here, and I mean, there's a lot that we could still jump into. One thing that I'd love to just touch on briefly, and I'd love to do an episode where we get into this a bit further, is the use of AI inside all of this, because we've seen some very, very powerful things come about as a result of AI, and about 10% of scientists that study AI and work with them regularly do believe that they will eventually wipe out humanity. Like, it'll be a full-on Terminator T2 kind of episode where we've got tanks rolling over piles of skulls that are driven by some micro machine that's light years away on the other side of the globe. Have you seen any connection with that and some of the concepts we've been talking about tonight?
Yeah, well, not the stuff that we really talked about yet. I mean, because again, I think there's this concept called technique, which I mentioned to you before the show. It's a very powerful one, and it's that essentially when you reach maximum efficiency in any protocol or method whatsoever, you know that is achieving technique. And so that is what that is called, is actually achieving the highest technological form. And so, for example, if there's dozens and dozens and dozens of different ways you can get at the milk inside of a coconut, for example. You can bash against a wall, you can take a hammer and try to beat it open, et cetera, et cetera. Each one of those ways of getting the milk out is a technical form, right? And achieving the most efficient technical form is, you said, to reach technique, except technique extends beyond that and encompasses all of these most efficient technical forms within a unit of its own, right? And that is technique. We'll definitely get in somewhat future episode talking about that more. But artificial intelligence, to me, represents essentially achieving the achievement of technique, is creating a machine that is powerful enough to encompass and enact all of these most efficient technical forms. Now, when we approach that type of singularity, if you will, the requirement for human beings in these processes becomes less and less and less. In fact, humans will only be introducing inefficiencies in all of these forms. And so the machine, if you will seek to destroy the inefficiencies, and thus will seek to destroy humankind. And I think I don't know where I stand exactly on artificial intelligence. I haven't studied it too in depth, I should say, because I don't know if it has the creative capacity that humans do, but I know that in the fourth industrial revolution, they written by Klaus Schwab, fourth industrial revolution came out 2017, I want to say. They do this demonstration where they had an artificial intelligence write a book and then a human write a book, and they had the editor of the New York Times or something like that read both, and he had to like say which one was written by the AI. He couldn't tell. He couldn't tell. So
Wow.
if artificial intelligence does have as creative capacity that is just like a human's, or perhaps even better, then I think that's something we very definitively should avoid. But this technique, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. Technique will always seek to better itself no matter what. And it's not an active process that any human really participates in. They passively participate. It is technique acting through them, according to the author of the book. And so when a discovery is made by Joe Blow in some lab somewhere, well, Joe Blow in Austria is actually would have discovered it if Joe Blow in America didn't. You know, it's like it doesn't matter. It's like in this advanced technological society, these things will just happen no matter what, because all these scientists, all these engineers, that's all they're doing is seeking more information and trying to streamline and make things more efficient to achieve the highest efficiency possible and dominate their realm, their area of knowledge, their area of expertise. And so technique is just this kind of thing that just by its own advances. And it seems to me like the epitome of technique would be manifested in some form of artificial, non-human, machine intelligence. And I think that we're very, too, it's so interesting to me because I asked, like, before the show when we were kind of talking about this, is like, I don't know what the mechanism of artificial intelligence is. Like, what is the substance of the machine intelligence? Is it, is it actually just ones and zeros and some electronic thing doing this, or is there something more to it? So it's a fascinating and I think very troubling scenario. Psychopaths enacting it, that have their finger on the on switch. That yes, go ahead, artificial intelligence. Figure out the best way to mulch through humanity, please.
Well, it's wild too, because from what I've seen with AI is, well, it's a good one too. It's wild from what I've seen just in my own studies is that AI, by and large, tries to find the easiest way between 2 points to achieve whatever task or whatever thing it's asked of, or is asked of it. Like when somebody says to it, "Hey, can you tell me, AI, if you're a machine?" And maybe the person doesn't know that they're speaking to an AI bot. There was actually a test it did not too long ago on this, but the AI had a person do a captcha. Like, when you go onto certain websites, it says, "Hey, to verify that this is your account, can you click all the pictures that have bicycles in them, or click all the pictures that show a fire hydrant?" And it asked the TaskRabbiter, "Hey, can you complete this captcha?" And the TaskRabbiter said to them, "Are you a machine?" And you could see the AI's thought process because they have it able to dump its internal workings onto a Word document. You can see what it's thinking. And it said something approximating, "I shouldn't let this person know that I'm a machine." And so of its own volition, it comes up with the lie of, "Oh, I'm vision impaired. Can you do this captcha for me? Because I can't do it myself." And it was able to trick the person in that capacity. But by and large, they work very hard to find the simplest route between 2 points, the question and then the answer, or the problem and the solution. So like you were saying, the idea of technique, getting to that irreducible complexity where you have the simplest way to do something, but it's maybe not so much simple as it is efficient. I guess maybe that's the most efficient way to do something. Seems to me that is what the force driving these things are. And when I imagine that put in conjunction with mapping the human brain out and then seeing the effects of what certain drugs or jabs or I guess modes of behavior in association with those things that we distract ourselves with have on a person, I feel like this thing could very easily dominate mankind. Now, I know that they supposedly build fail safes into these things where when they're designing an AI, they have to sort of answer certain questions. Is this thing able to lie to a human? Is it able to fool a human? Is it able to provide deadly information, like taking a picture of the chemicals that are on somebody's shelf inside their garage and then giving them a formula for how to make napalm using those chemicals, or how to substitute one that maybe they don't have for something else? Is it able to do all these things? Is it able to replicate itself? Is it able to make money on its own? Is it able to replicate itself and then exist unknown by anybody else out there? There's all these
Mhm.
things. And I feel like there's like I don't quite know where the connection is yet between what we talked about today, Ghost in the Machine, and then AI, but there has to be something there. Because I mean,
Mhm.
if you have from the horse's mouth already, Klaus Schwab writes this book, and like you said, the enemy is literally going, "Hey, look, here's all of our plans. This is exactly what we're gonna do. But you guys are too busy Netflixing and chilling, so you're not going to pay attention to any of this stuff that we're telling you that we're going to do, and you're going to let it happen to you."
Mhm. Yeah.
It's intense. Suffice to say, folks, be prayed up, be armored up, keep your eyes open, and do what you have to do for yourself and for your posterity. Do the uncomfortable thing. Be willing to engage with that uncomfortability, because when you're in an uncomfortable state, things happen. You pay attention. It's time and time again, you see inside the Bible. Israel gets to a place of comfortability, and then they get lax in their worship of God. And then before you know it, they're offering up their children to Moloch. And what happens to them? They get slapped right back down, put into slavery, and they get punished over and over and over until they get that act together and they start paying attention. God raises up that righteous person who liberates them, and then they continue on until that person goes. And we have a cycle after cycle after cycle all throughout the book of Judges. Um, let's get to the point where even though we have it good, we're still maintaining that exercise of the mind and of the body and of our spirit, so we stay sharp and we continue to observe and to learn and to do, and make it a point to shun sin at every possibility, every possible stance, every
Mhm.
possible time that you are bombarded by it. Because you can be that cut above, and the only way that we stand to actually hold ourselves up inside this coming age that is here and is being proliferated more and more and more every single day, is if you do have a basis in faith. Because at least we have something to stand on. Somebody who doesn't have a faith, their feet are planted firmly in midair. And it's a wonder why you see suicide on the rise, and as you described, deaths of despair.
Yep.
But
Absolutely.
anyway, folks, that's going to be our time for tonight. A big thank you again to Daniel for jumping on stream with us. And
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, I appreciate it, man. This is a second of many here. Um, I always learn a ton when we speak, and it's nice to have you sort of break down some of these books for us that you've chomped through. um, Daniel does have the links to, or at least the images of the books on his podcast. So if you guys are wanting to jump into some of this material yourself, which I definitely encourage you to do so, you'll be able to see at least, I think, the covers of the books. I think they're listed on most of your episodes here. I'll share the page again. But we have Political Ponerology, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, Impact of Science on Society, The Next Million Years, The Impact of Science on Society. That's the one we were talking about tonight, with Bertrand Russell having written that one. It's it is it's a dark rabbit hole to go down for sure. And as we talked about last time we spoke together, there is sort of this tendency for, when you have such heavy truth revealed to you, to sort of become a cynical asshole about things. And again, the bulwark against that is being prayed up, recognizing that, hey, we have that hope for tomorrow because of who we serve. If you're a Christian, you have a hope for tomorrow. You know that this isn't the end. You know that there is so much more to come, and you have to hold on to that hope because it gives you hope. Dan, last word is yours, sir.
Oh, this, thank you again. I echo that. It's, you know, even if we die in this fight, it's our reward is not in this life. And, I I don't know. I guess maybe I have a crusader's heart, and I'm looking for some thing to fight for. But this is it. This is what I feel like is my calling, is understanding this reality and toppling this. And it is just, I am just some little guy that is basically, without God. I know God can do all things, and so I rely totally upon Him for this, because obviously me of my own very meager intelligence and skill set couldn't possibly stop what's coming, but I know He can, absolutely. And so I petition Him every single day for that, and whatever small part I can play in that, um, please, I'm happy to do so. And I do have great hope, as you mentioned, because I even if we don't win, I know, I hope that my cause will mean, my actions will mean something beneficial for not only my wife and my children, but hopefully other people I can help. I know I've helped people, and so I have great hope that we will not necessarily win. I think we can easily, actually, but that our futures, if we do what's right, are also very, very beautiful and wonderful. So that's it.
Amen, brother. Well, there you have it, folks. You all have a wonderful rest of your evening. Have a great weekend. I'm streaming schedule, getting some more guests lined up here, in addition to finishing up my Nephilim series, but more to come. So keep a lookout on that notification bell when it pops up. Until next time, folks, be blessed and be a blessing. Have a good night.